Tonight's episode of Out in Front is brought to you by our season sponsors, Concili Inc., Nevada State Education Association, 1APIA Nevada, Silver State Voices, and Stefan and Marta Schmidt, as well as our episode sponsors, Save Lives Nevada and Washoe Education Association. Tonight's episode of Out in Front is brought to you by our season sponsors, Concili Inc., Nevada State Education Association, 1APIA Nevada, Silver State Voices, and Stefan and Marta Schmidt, as well as our episode sponsors, Save Lives Nevada, and Washoe Education Association.
All right, welcome back, everyone, to Out in Front. My name is Annette Magnus, and I'm the Executive Director of Battleborn Progress. So great to have you again this evening. Welcome back. We are going to be talking tonight about all things Build Back Better. So the House of Representatives and the United States Senate have been going all day today, since very early this morning when we woke up to monitor what the progress was on the Build Back Better agenda. And they still haven't finished yet. So we're going to be learning all things about Build Back Better, why we need to pass this agenda, what's in it, and why it matters to all of you. So we've gathered a few experts nationally and locally to talk about those things. Tonight, I am so excited to be joined by some very special guests, that some of whom you met before and some are new to our show. The first person I'd like to welcome back is Frank Clemente. He's with the Americans for Tax Fairness. The second one is Emily Woodall. She's with the League of Conservation Voters. We have Lorenzita Santos with One APIA, and we have Brian Lee, who's also our Battleborn Progress Board Chair, and he's with the Nevada State Education Association. So welcome, everyone. Frank, I want to go to you first. I know it's late. You're back in DC. You've been monitoring this stuff all day. So introduce yourself, give the viewers a little overview of what Americans for Tax Fairness is again, and then tell us what's happening in Washington, D.C. today.
Hey, good to see you, Annette. Hi, everybody. Frank Clemente here. Americans for Tax Fairness is a national coalition. If you're in an organization in Nevada, perhaps and you have a national affiliate, you're probably active in our coalition. We represent unions, think tanks, advocacy groups, faith, small business, kind of you name it, progressive forces here in Washington nationally. We've been around for about a decade, and finally we're in the Super Bowl of the tax debate. Most of the time we've existed, it's been a defensive fight. We've been fighting Republicans who want to slash taxes for the rich and corporations. This is our first real big fight where we are on offense, and we have a great chance of raising a lot more money from corporations and the rich and putting that money into all the things that we care about, investments in working families and communities. A lot is happening in Washington, and it can be pretty confusing, and I apologize for that. It's not my fault. But they say legislating is like making sausage, and it's very tricky here, especially when you have the margins that Democrats have. We have the White House, yes, but we have like no votes to spare in the Senate, as you know, and we have 3 votes to spare in the House. So it makes things really hard to get done. We're sort of waiting on pins and needles today because government funding actually expires at the end of today. That has been resolved. Both the Senate and the House have passed a government funding bill, which will continue government funding kind of on an automatic pilot into early December. One thing down is important because you probably have a lot of federal employees in Nevada who would have lost their job. Social Security checks wouldn't have gone out, things like that. So we need to have the government funded. Tonight, what you've been hearing about is the infrastructure bill. That is a bipartisan bill that was negotiated a couple of months ago between President Biden and Democrats and some Republicans. It's a $1.2 trillion bill. About $500 billion is new money. The rest of it is kind of automatic money that comes from the gas tax. And would have been funded anyway. About $500 billion, $500 billion is new money, really important money that would go into bricks and mortar concrete, roads, bridges, mass transit, really important things like that, including buses. It's a we've kind of been playing chicken here. The moderates in the House demanded that that bill be voted on by the 27th of September. And progressives said, no, you can't move that without moving the Build Back Better bill, which is what we're also talking about here tonight. And Speaker Pelosi is insisting on putting this bill, the infrastructure bill, on the floor. I don't really understand why, because the entire progressive community is against that. We feel if that bill passes, we lose the leverage we have to get the moderates to support a robust Build Back Better plan. She's, as they say, she said she's got it up scheduled for a vote after 9 tonight. My guess is it won't happen. The Progressive Caucus, which is 90, 100 members strong, a good portion of them are saying, no way, we do not want to give up this leverage. We do not want to get this thing passed. The two bills have to move in tandem. The third element here is the Build Back Better plan. And that is, the House has crafted its Build Back Better plan. It hasn't voted on it yet, but all the committees have passed their portions of it. It's been rolled up and it's sort of sitting ready to go to the House floor. But the House is not going to put it up for a vote until a deal can be cut with the Senate. The deal is about getting agreement on what's the top line revenue amount. The House bill has $3.5 trillion of real money, important money for a host of services we can talk about. And it's about $2.3 trillion in new revenue to pay for it. All coming from the rich and corporations. Anyone making under $400,000 would not be taxed. But the House doesn't want to vote on that, doesn't want to move forward that until it's clear what the Senate moderates are going to agree to. And you've heard the names Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema, your next door neighbor in Arizona. They have not said what they can live with, what their bottom lines are. And until that gets figured out, until they say it, and tell it, and it gets put in writing, the House is not going to move forward on legislation. So we are stalled on the Build Back Better plan. It will not be $3.5 trillion because both of those senators have said they will not spend that amount of money, even if it's 100% paid for, which it could be. And we do not know how quickly that is going to move. Manchin is in a very go slow mode on that. It could go till December before this is resolved, which obviously from an activist mobilization point of view is kind of a downer. So anyway, that's the top lines on this. I hope that covers it and that is clear.
It's clear to me. I want to encourage folks, if you have questions for Frank, now is the time to ask those in the chat. Frank's going to hop off after this just because so much is moving in DC. And then we're going to go to our next guest after Frank hops off. So we're going to stick with Frank for a few minutes because he's the DC expert on this, and then come to our local experts. So Frank, I got a couple questions for you before we go to audience questions. You know, there's been a lot of talk about just the general opinion around taxing the rich, right? That term, tax the rich. Everybody thinks that's so left and so progressive, but it's not. Everybody should pay their fair share. And we've seen disproportionately in this pandemic, you know, regular people are paying far more than the rich when it comes to taxes. And so, you know, in order to pay for things detailed in the Build Back Better package, you got to tax someone. Somebody's got to pay for that. So don't you think it's time to like tax the rich, tax the wealthy, and that the wealthy start paying their fair share for things?
Yes, let's tack on and corporations to that slogan. We don't use tax the rich too much. It actually does not poll or test as well because a lot of folks want to become rich someday. But if you talk about making the rich and corporations pay their fair share of taxes, that is a test very high. 2/3 of the electorate supports that agenda. And even in red states like West Virginia, which is the reddest of the red, we just put a poll out there today, and it was like big news because it's a red state, but they're telling Joe Manchin, no, we will support this Build Back Better plan if you tax billionaires, if you tax corporations, make them pay their fair share. So the way to think about it is this way: about 2/3 of the public supports our agenda, supports this agenda. The 1/3 who don't, it's largely Republicans, some independents, and Republicans come in all stripes, all colors, mostly white, but they're different income levels. And so, lots of flavors here, but the vast majority of the public supports this agenda. And what we have found, we've done a lot of polling on the Build Back Better plan, and others have done it as well. What we are consistently finding is that the plan, there's public support for the plan, spending $3.5 trillion on all these great services for working families, gets better, gets stronger when you say it will be paid for and how it will be paid for. We know a big chunk of the population, independent voters in particular, they aren't they're not fully comfortable with a lot more government spending. They have some discomfort around the debt and deficits, but when you can tell them it's going to be paid for, that's why you heard Joe Biden, maybe you heard him last week say zero cost. That's because his plan is fully paid for, and so it's a winning issue with the voters, and these investments are even more supported by the public when you say the rich and corporations, it's time they pay for their share to help fund these things.
Absolutely. That makes total sense, Frank. Just a reminder for the audience, if you have questions for Frank, now is the time to ask them in any of the chats, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, Facebook. We are taking your questions live now, so put them in the chat. So my next question for you, Frank, is can you tell us, obviously we know two of the roadblocks, which is Kyrsten Sinema, who's become a giant roadblock and pain in the ass, and then Joe Manchin. But what is this, what does the road look like as we go forward? And what is this battle gonna look like ahead? What are your predictions here?
We're going to get a substantial amount of revenue, a substantial amount of new investments out of this process. We are not going to get $3.5 trillion. $3.5 trillion, that number is not made up. It's not a made up number. Basically, that's what the administration and leadership felt was important to get us, free community college, public community college, pre-K, universal pre-K for all 3 and 4-year-olds, a significant family and medical leave program for all workers, childcare so that your working family is not paying more than 7% of your expenses on childcare, big subsidies, big support to buy healthcare on the Affordable Care Act plans. Too many folks above $400,000 cannot afford them. They need help. Even below that, they need help. They need subsidies. Medicare expansion, dental, vision, and hearing. Medicare does not cover that now. This plan would provide that coverage. Major investment in green energy, creating a green energy economy. A quarter of a big chunk of money for that. Retrofitting homes, just getting us electric power, electric cars, etc. So these are huge investments. If we have to come down from $3.5 trillion, the question is, what are some of those going to be cut out completely, or is the number of years that those benefits are going to be available to people going to be cut? Let me not forget the child tax credit expansion, which runs out. It's a 1-year program. It was in the Recovery Act. It runs out this year. We want to renew that for at least 4 or 5 years. A lot of money to do that. If the spending comes down, is it going to only get renewed for another 2 years rather than 5 years? And remember, this is a program that has the potential of reducing child poverty by 40, 50%. So we're going to get a plan. It'll get through, but it's not going to be $3.5 trillion. So the question is, Manchin's at $1.5 trillion. The rest of us are $3.5 trillion. Can we meet in the middle? The other thing is it'll be fully paid for, probably all through tax revenue, taxes on the rich and corporations. Maybe some of it will become, if we can get Medicare prescription drug negotiations, if that's allowed, and we have too many Democrats who are kind of fronting for the pharmaceutical industry, and they haven't come on board yet. But if that happens, maybe we raise $200, $300, $400 billion that way too. That's how the whole thing gets paid for. So my hope is that obviously we want to get as close to $3.5 trillion as possible. We are not going to get that far, but even if it's $2.5 trillion, that's still a big win. And the way to think about this, we will be putting in place major new initiatives, programs, investments that will transform people's lives. And once we get those in place, it's going to be a lot harder to get rid of them as well. The same on the revenue thing. The other thing about this is we are changing the whole narrative on taxes and investments. For 40 years, we've lived under the Reagan supply side trickle down tax cut narrative, where the theory was you give tax breaks to the rich, you give tax breaks to corporations, and it trickles down. We all know now that happened. The experience with the Trump tax cut confirmed that, right? Nobody felt the Trump tax cuts. People weren't getting big raises from their corporations. There wasn't this huge investment boom. It all went into stock buybacks to inflate the value of stocks. So the CEOs got rich. So we're in a process here where long run, we've got to have, the whole country's got to be behind this. We can do the things, the big transformative things, the major investments we want on an ongoing basis by making the rich and corporations pay their fair share. So if we can get at least $2.5 trillion from this bill, and it's paid for in that way, and people have to defend it next year in an election year, we will be changing the big picture narrative here on where politicians are. You in your own state, I'm sure you have these tax battles in your own state where too many Democrats are not on our side on the tax issue. They're too afraid of their donors, etc. This is all about showing that this is a winning issue. It's a winning issue with the voters, and it can be a winning issue even in elections.
Yeah, well, Frank, in our state, we actually just don't even believe in taxes. We don't tax anything, as Brian is about to tell you in a little bit. We don't want to pay for schools or roads or, infrastructure of any kind. I mean, that's just kind of like the Nevada way. So it doesn't shock me about what you're saying. And yes, Democrats often run from this issue, as we just experienced this past session. Brian and I will talk about that later. But what I do want to ask is along the same lines, I don't understand it. I grew up in a household where paying taxes was something that we were proud to do, because if you want the fire department to come to your house when it's burning down, that's kind of how you pay for it. Or if you want good teachers and, good schools, you got to pay for those things. And the only way to pay for those things is with tax dollars. So you got to invest in these things if you really want to have nice things. So in your opinion, why are there so many people who are middle class, maybe, on the poverty line, that are so against taxing rich people and corporations, when doing so would actually benefit the middle class and lighten our burden, especially when it comes to lowering costs for healthcare, paying for college, childcare, all of these essential things that you just talked about?
Well, really, as I talked about earlier, I think that the public is, 2/3 of the public is on our side. So the huge swath of the middle class and working families are on our side on this issue. What's interesting is they're more on our side just on the tax fairness issue, right? It's kind of this core value for folks that the system's rigged. The rich and corporations are making out really well in this economy, and everybody else is suffering. Remember, we've been putting out these reports on billionaires. Billionaire wealth has gone up 62% since the pandemic began. $1.8 trillion. Just think about this for a minute. $1.8 trillion in 17 months, their wealth went up. That is enough to pay for more than half of Biden's Buildback Better plan for 10 years. For 10 years. That helps tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of Americans. 700 billionaires made $1.8 trillion. Their wealth went up $1.8 trillion. That could fund more than half of this program. The public really is on our side. They don't like corporations. They don't like all these loopholes, et cetera. Where I think the public has had trouble is, one is you have too many politicians who are afraid of the tax issue, and too many people talk about it as a burden. It's a burden to pay taxes. No, it's a really good patriotic thing to do because it gives us the great things that we have in life: schools, public services, libraries, roads, bridges, the ability to get ahead in life, et cetera. Corporations do well because of the public infrastructure. So the second thing, though, is people used to really, and they still are, skeptical about government. They were down on government for a long time, but the pandemic has really helped change that too. People are seeing the power of government, the power of the public sector to deliver services, to rescue them when they needed rescuing in this horrible pandemic where the economy completely crashed and where our public health crashed as well. And the government has done pretty darn good at rescuing both the economy and rescuing our health system. We have this COVID variant problem, obviously, which is kind of dragging it back. But anyway, public attitude about government has really changed a lot too, and it's gotten much more, it's in the plus now. It used to be in the negative. So, but the public really doesn't like the politicians in Washington. I don't know how they feel about your state capital folks, but they don't like the politicians in Washington. The people there's a rehabbing needed on how the politicians are perceived. If they were out there fighting day in and day out for working families, I guarantee you the public would have a much higher opinion of politicians. And if they weren't out, protecting special interests. So that's kind of my theory.
I don't know what you mean. Joe Manchin being lobbied from the back of his yacht shouldn't be a problem, Frank. I don't understand. What are you talking about? Okay, we got a couple audience questions I want to get to, and then we'll let you hop and go to the rest of the panel. So this first question is from Will. It says, since the moderates are trying to force cuts, what are the parts of Build Back Better that we are absolutely cannot lose in bringing down the cost of the bill? So like what pieces must stay in? We've been doing a lot around prescription drugs. I know that's super important to our partners over at HCAN. Like, what are those pieces that cannot come out of this bill?
And I don't want to choose sides here. I'm a coalition, and we have people in our coalition that are fighting tooth and nail on the child tax credit, preserving that. Others are working hard as heck on paid family leave and on childcare. Brian's here with an education association. National Education Association, American Federation of Teachers, an important part of our coalition. They care a lot about the community college financial support and the pre-K education. They know how important that is for folks to succeed later in life. We have SEIU, AFSCME, healthcare unions in our coalition. They care about the Affordable Care Act, strengthening that. So I can't pick sides. I was just on a call earlier today with the Progressive Caucus leadership, and they were asked the same question. Okay, well, you have to come down. What are you going to? And you got to see the package. We got to see the package. We got to see what it looks like, and it's going to be painful. If we have to cut a lot of stuff, it's going to be painful. If one has to decide between funding things for 2 years, it's hard. The one thing I would say is, if you're creating new programs, like some of the stuff in the green energy area will be new programs. The free community college will be a new program. The child care, no, that's not, but the paid family leave is a new program. The Medicare, dental, vision, hearing, that's a new program. It's going to be a lot harder to stand up to get those programs up and running if they're not going to be running for very long. So those would be things that would be more likely to not be funded because you just can't get it up to scale and have it succeed.
That makes total sense. All right, our next question comes from Mike. He asked, can we get a pick? And I think you did a little bit of this earlier. Can we get a comparison for the kind of wealth that we're talking about taxing?
Well, so the way to think about the Biden plan. So the Biden plan was $3.5 trillion. About almost 2/3 of it, maybe 60% of it, was from corporations. And there was two big chunks from corporations. One was raising the corporate tax rate from 21% to 28%. That raised about $800 billion of the $3.5 trillion, so almost a quarter. And the other was closing the international tax loopholes. Multinationals, especially drug corporations and high-tech corporations, they get away with murder. They pay a much lower tax rate because they can move their patents to tax havens, and they run all the revenue through these tax havens, and they don't pay much in taxes. Biden put forward a very progressive plan to try and shut down those loopholes. So that's where, again, about 60% of the revenue comes from there. About a quarter of the revenue, and by the way, taxing corporations is taxing rich people. The people who own corporations are the people who own the stock in the corporations, and they are mostly rich people. So that's about a quarter of the revenue is coming from going after tax cheats, and those are rich tax cheats and corporate tax cheats. About $700 billion. That is in pretty good shape. We don't think, it may not raise that much money. There's been a big push. The bankers are right now trying to fight this tooth and nail. They don't want to have new reporting requirements where they would have to report on anybody whose bank account has 10,000, where the financial flows in, or at least $10,000 a year. They would have to report to the IRS so that the IRS could check it against what they're claiming on their tax forms. The banks are saying too much. We don't want to have to do that. The other quarter comes from taxing the rich. I was a bit disappointed. I thought the president went pretty light on taxing the rich, and he only had one real provision there to tax the super rich on raising the capital gains tax rate to have it equal the tax rate on wage income. And too many conservatives, too many moderate Democrats are forcing that down. They're not going to equalize the rates on taxing income from your stock portfolio. It's going to still be about 15% lower than on your wages. And that's a loss. And there was also a big provision that prevented Jeff Bezos. Right now, if Jeff Bezos dies and his assets pass on to his heirs, his Amazon stock. So he bought his Amazon stock, say 10 or 20 bucks. It's now worth $200, and it's what created his wealth of $180-190 billion. All the increase in wealth, if he was to sell it, he would pay taxes on it. If he passes on to his heirs right now, they pay no taxes on it. Completely passed on the increase in wealth tax-free. And Biden tried to close that. We lost that battle. The exciting thing is we now have Senator Ron Wyden is proposing a billionaire's income tax. You can go to the Americans for Tax Fairness website and learn about the billionaire's income tax. That's what we're going to try and rally folks around. Go after the 800, 700 billionaires in this country and make them start paying tax every year on the increase in their wealth, just like we all pay in our paychecks every month, every week, and add it up every year. That's what we want to do. They should pay as they profit, as they make their billions through the pandemic, et cetera. That whatever is an asset where a stock asset, we know how much it's going up in value. They should be paying taxes on that. It won't be the Ron Wyden from Oregon. He's not proposing that they pay the top rate, but at least the capital gains tax rate. So right now they're paying nothing.
So the boogeyman is not coming from my paycheck. He's coming for Jeff Bezos. That's what I'm hearing you say. Sounds good to me. So the last question I'm going to have for you is, and it's the same nonsense we see here at the state level too. The chambers and other businesses claim that Build Back Better will lead to job loss. It's the same thing we hear on everything from public option to, taxing the mines here in Nevada to whatever, right? So they're wrong. And how are they wrong? Because I think this Build Back Better agenda actually will help create jobs and will help invest in infrastructure, which creates jobs. We saw that under the New Deal, decades ago. It's the same principle here. So talk to us about why, the chambers, they always use this scare tactic and it's not real.
Yeah, well, on a macro level, I mean, all the independent analysts out there that don't have a Republican axe to grind, and not necessarily a Democratic axe, the independent analysts, Moody's Analytics, for instance, they will say that this will significantly increase the gross domestic product, so the growth in the economy. It will result in 4 or 5, 6 million new jobs on a steady basis over 10 years. and it will pump a lot more wealth into the economy because it's taking wealth from folks who it's idle wealth. For billionaires, you can only spend, for millionaires, for ultra rich people, you can only spend so much every year, right? You can only buy so many yachts. A lot of their money just sits around. Really, a lot of their money is sitting in what we call dynasty trust, and it's just going to be passed on to their heirs. Whereas if you tax them, you put the money, then you're going to put the money right into the economy, because it's going to go into building the roads, educating kids at pre-K, helping working families get to work through childcare. So that's the main way. Remember about corporations, corporations don't pay taxes unless they're profitable. And they're only profitable if they've got people buying their products and if they're investing in their corporation and innovating. But they don't pay taxes on the money they're investing in that corporation at the front end. They only pay it if they're making money at the back end. So the taxes are simply on the back end. It's the money that they have left over after they've done their good things, after they've paid their workers, after they've made their investments, after they've expanded their markets. Then they're taxed, and then we tax it, and then we put into things. Essentially, it is a redistribution. Take it from the owners of the corporation, and if you're investing it in the kinds of things we're talking about, you're helping spread it around. So it's sort of a back end way to give wages, increase the wages of workers, increase the services for workers, is to tax the corporation. So it's revenue generating, and it expands the economy, it expands jobs, it does not contract.
That makes sense. Well, thank you, Frank. As always, I appreciate you. Thanks for joining us. I know it's late DC time, but we'll let you get back to the House and Senate, and we'll invite you back again soon. Thanks for everything you're doing.
Thanks, Annette. Take care, everybody. Bye.
Thank you. All right, I want to bring in Brian, Emily, and Lorenzita. Brian, I'm going to come to you first. Introduce yourself, tell the guests who you are and what you do.
Hello, everyone. I'm Brian Lee. I'm the Executive Director of the Nevada State Education Association. I represent teachers and support staff and educators statewide. I also happen to be the chair of the Battleborn Progress.
Absolutely. All right, Emily, come on in and introduce yourself to the people.
Hi, thank you so much, Annette, for having me on tonight. My name is Emily Woodall. I am the State Director for the League of Conservation Voters, and we work to build public support for clean energy and pro-environmental initiatives in the state.
And then Lorenzita.
Hi, Lorenzita Santos, the Outreach Coordinator for One API in Nevada. OAN is a grassroots nonprofit organization working to advance the interests of hardworking Asian Pacific Islander Americans here in Nevada. We work on items like comprehensive immigration reform, health equity, education equity, language access, and I'm really glad to be here.
We're glad to have you. All right, Brian, I'm going to come to you first, and we'll just kind of go round robin. Reminder to the guests at home, if you're watching and you have questions for these folks on anything Build Back Better, ask in the chat. So, Brian, what does passing this package mean for jobs in Nevada, especially during times like these when things are still fragile? And especially, what does this mean for educators?
It's important to remember that here in Nevada, we're lagging some of the economic rebound that's happening in other states. Like over 1/3 of our culinary brothers and sisters in the culinary union are still not back to work full time. And that's a good metric for what's happening with hospitality workers statewide. Unextended unemployment benefits have ended for many of our workers in the state, and whatever meager savings they had have run through. So what this plan represents is the ability to have respect and the ability to build a middle-class lifestyle going forward. Unless there is permanency in the child tax credit, unless people are able to have good paying jobs through either the apprenticeships that are provided for in this plan, through the clean energy jobs that are provided for, there's union training jobs through apprenticeships. There's also minimum $15 an hour jobs for the universal pre-K, as well as in-home supportive services, which are some of the hardest working members of our community and some of the people who are paid the least. So there's ways of being able to build up the bottom of our economic strata and make sure that everyone has the respect they need. Also, there's pathways for people who are often overlooked to help diversify our teaching pool that is provided for the Build Back Better plan. There's teach grants, there's a grow your own plan that will provide for over, I believe, 8,000 teaching positions, which are badly needed here in Nevada. So there's a way of being able to provide for jobs here in Nevada, but also economic opportunities at a time when we are still lagging from the effects of the pandemic, many of our other sister states.
Sorry, I was trying to get off mute. So, you know, obviously we are lagging behind on some of this stuff. And for me, I think the real question is here, if this package doesn't pass, can you talk about the effects that would have on our recovery going forward? You just said, you know, we're already lagging behind. What happens to educators, to culinary workers, to union members, to people who are, you know, out there in our community, serving our community every single day? What happens?
I can just run off a couple of quick statistics. This plan has an extra $1 billion for Nevada schools. This plan doesn't pass. That's an extra $1 billion that's pulled out of our communities. That was money that is not only for, this is not money that's going to educator salaries, though there is money for that as well. The $1 billion is for infrastructure to make sure our schools are safe, make sure that there's HVAC, to make sure that there is upgrades to our school buildings in the way of green energy. All that money is pulled out of this state. The multiplier effect on that is huge and help lift all boats in this state. The plan also provides for 2 years of free community college. There's over 17,000 students who can go to community college, but do not have the money to go to community college in this state. So that and that economic opportunities for those students would fail. There's also plans here to have subsidized tuition for four-year institutions that are minority serving institutions in the state of Nevada. That is Nevada State College, CSN, and UNLV. All qualify, so they'd be able to get subsidized tuition for up to 2 years under this plan. So that wouldn't be, if this plan doesn't pass, that doesn't happen. So future students would be saddled with student loan debt. We would also, as I said before, not have a pathway for up to 8,000 teachers to be employed. We wouldn't have good high-paying jobs for universal pre-K. You wouldn't be able, if you don't have the nest egg you previously had, you wouldn't necessarily be able to have a child because what you were planning on was being able to have a nest egg saved up to, because we are one of the few countries that don't have a paid family leave plan. The only one left in the United States, since Papua New Guinea did get a paid family leave plan. So the United States is the only one left. Maybe Papua New Guinea making us look bad. But if you don't have that nest egg saved up, you might have to delay having a family. But with the Build Back Better plan, you would have up to 12 weeks of paid family leave, up to $1,000 a week to help you for you and your spouse to be able to provide for your family. So there's things in this that help build the American family, build the American dream, and build just basic respect for the American worker.
Makes sense to me. All right, Emily, I want to bring you in next. You know, obviously the environment has been a very big part of this discussion. Climate change is real for those at home. So if you didn't know and you didn't realize, climate change is affecting us every single day. If you've walked outside any day this week in Las Vegas, you probably couldn't breathe if you have asthma like me. So I want to talk to you, Emily, about why focusing on clean energy in this package is so important, especially for a place like Nevada.
Yeah, that's a great question, Annette. So before I really dig into clean energy, I just want to say something about our existing energy sources. So we obviously know that carbon-based energy sources are harmful to the environment and to our health, but they are also becoming harder and harder to extract from the earth. And so that's going to put the United States on a path to really force us to make a clean energy transition or transition to a clean energy economy. And honestly, I think that's a good thing for Nevada. We have the potential to be a national leader when it comes to clean energy technology. We are one of the sunniest, if not the sunniest states in the nation. And that means our potential for solar powered energy sources here in Southern Nevada is incredibly huge. And then we also have a lot of potential for geothermal up north as well. And so not only does that mean that we will transition to safer, cleaner sources of energy, but that will help us create jobs in the state as well. What's great about clean energy jobs is that they can't be, sent overseas. They can't be sent even to other states if, we're working specifically in Nevada. But we do know that as of 2019, we had over 33,000 clean energy jobs in the state, and that number is only poised to grow under the Build Back Better plan, which will provide a bunch of incentives to transition to that clean energy economy.
So this is not just about clean energy. This is also going to be a huge boon for jobs. And I think people forget about that, right? Like, we can do a good thing and, acknowledge the fact that climate change is real here and also create jobs in our communities here in Nevada and all across the country.
That's exactly right. And I think a lot of times when people hear about environmentalists, they think about people who are conserving or working to conserve, large green spaces or niche, species. But really what this is about is taking care of human communities as well. And there's this false narrative that we've seen for many years now that you have to choose between the economy and our ecological systems that are in place. And that's a false dichotomy. We can take care of the earth that we're inhabiting while also providing jobs, good paying union jobs for people.
Absolutely. So speaking of that, I do want to ask a second question. How could provisions in the Build Back Better package help Nevada as we move toward cleaner energy methods and clean energy jobs? Because we know that is one of the things that we talk a lot about here in Nevada is this clean energy future here in Nevada. So talk to us about what that future could look like.
Yeah. So one of the provisions within Build Back Better that I'm especially excited about is what's called the Justice 40 initiative. And Justice 40 is Biden's promise that 40% of federal investments in clean energy technologies and climate mitigation will go to historically disadvantaged communities. So these are low-income communities, Black and Brown communities who face decades of environmental racism, and communities who've historically had to rely on extractive industries just to survive. And so this is going to be a whole government approach where we'll see different departments within the federal government working with local communities and local governments to address the needs specific to those communities. And so what this could look like in Nevada is we could see, for example, the Environmental Protection Agency working with local leaders to secure clean buses or clean, solar panels for schools in lower income communities and those who are disproportionately impacted by poor air quality and asthma. We could also see things like the Department of Housing and Urban Development working with local governments to help weatherize homes so that communities become more resilient to the impacts of climate change. And I know that I mentioned specifically clean energy jobs, but I think within this transition to a clean energy economy and adapting to a changing climate, we're going to see jobs in all types of markets, come up. And that's something that we'll see investments in with the Build Back Better plan. So in order to make this transition, we're going to need people who can help weatherize homes. We're going to need researchers and scientists and teachers, and making that transition will support an entire community. And so I think that's really important to consider, that it's not just about people who are installing solar panels or wind turbines. It's a whole community approach.
Thank you for that, Emily. All right, I want to bring in Lorenzita. Lorenzita, another part of this that folks are really concerned about is the fight for a pathway to citizenship. That has been a part of this agenda and been something that's been being worked on for some time now. I know advocates on our side have been talking a lot about that and how, immigration reform in particular, but every aspect of the immigration system and a pathway to citizenship needs to be addressed. So talk to us about that and what is in this package and why that's so important.
Yeah, of course. So I just wanted to preface that last week, folks in Nevada from organizations like Plan, Mi Familia Vota, PP Votes, Make the Road, sent directly impacted folks to DC to fight for a pathway to citizenship through budget reconciliation. And just a little bit about why I went and my story. I'm Filipino. My aunt, my tita, is undocumented, and my aunts and my dad came to the United States 29 years ago, with the only difference being their status. So how does my story paint into the bigger picture? Well, in the AAPI community, this is the model minority myth, which is the faulty generalization that Asians are law-abiding, obedient, and successful, which creates this us versus them mentality between our community and other minority communities. The model minority myth paints specifically the AAPI community as coming to the country, quote unquote, the correct way, when in my own family, that's not the case. My dad, my mom, my kuya, which is my brother, have been able to visit the Philippines, while my auntie for 3 decades hasn't been able to. And I'm sharing my story because the best way to combat anti-immigrant narratives is to ensure that every community's voices is heard. That's why we're out there talking to our legislators, sharing our stories. We also marched from the ICE building to the Capitol with over 5,000 impacted folks. And we did that because we have to make sure AAPI stories like mine are highlighted, that the atrocities that happen in our Haitian communities are showcased, and that we stand in solidarity of our Latinx communities and all communities.
So yesterday, as part of this process, the Senate parliamentarian rejected a proposal that could have created a pathway to citizenship for millions of immigrants in America. Can you talk about what that means for the immigration battle going forward?
So I want to clarify for everyone that there is actually a precedent for ignoring the parliamentarian. Just some history here is that in 1975, the Vice President Rockefeller just ignored the parliamentarian's advisory opinion. Also, according to the former Senate parliamentarian Robert Dove, Vice President Herbert Humphrey just ignored the parliamentarian's advisory opinion routinely. And even in 2013, frustrated at Republicans' record numbers of filibusters, about the record numbers of filibusters against the lower court nominations, Democrats ignored the Senate parliamentarian's ruling and unilaterally eliminated the filibuster for lower court confirmations. So again, there is a precedent, and doesn't necessarily, just because the parliamentarian ruled and rejected the proposal doesn't mean that we don't still have a pathway to citizenship. This is important because our communities need a pathway to citizenship right now. On a national level, we have to pressure Vice President Kamala Harris to do her job as a role as Vice President and as a Senate proceeding officer to create a pathway to citizenship through budget reconciliation. And on a local level, that means we have to continue sharing our stories to our local representatives, making those calls, sending those emails, and stopping at nothing for our communities.
Absolutely. So Brian, I want to bring you back in. Speaking of our local representatives, obviously there's a lot here that's riding on these packages in this bill, everything from jobs to our immigrant community to the environment. I mean, literally everything is in these packages. So as it stands right now, where is our delegation? I believe our 2 senators are in a good spot on this. I think most of our delegation is in a good spot on this, but let's talk about Mark Amodei, because I get a little worried about his ability to actually do things that are good for Nevadans.
So Mark Amodei's position, as don't think you would be surprised, is that he is listening to his Republican leadership, and they're holding firm on this, and they are not in support of the Buildback Better plan, mainly because they want to preserve the tax incentives for the wealthiest Americans. Just remember, this plan is fully paid for. This plan is fully paid for by returning the marginal tax rates on people earning over $400,000 back to what they were prior to 2017, and by making corporations pay back what the corporate tax rate was before 2017. as well as ensuring that there are special tax breaks for fossil fuels, and ensuring that you can't just move your post office box to a foreign country as a corporation and adopt their tax rates. So those are the main pay-fors, and that is the main holdup on why this plan is being held up by the Republicans and Mark Amodei.
And Brian, just a question from the audience, and I want to remind our folks that we are taking questions from the audience. So wherever you're watching this, put your questions in the chat. We will get to your questions. Also, make sure you're sharing this on your Facebook, Twitter with your friends, your family, because they need to hear about all of these important issues. So Brian, Chris asks, how confident are you that the platform Democrats ran on will come to fruition with the Build Back Better plan? I would hate for the Democrats to look like the Republicans we see lying to their constituents every day.
I get being jaded, but the Build Back Better plan, I'm a progressive, so we get jaded pretty often. But the Build Back Better plan is the plan that they ran on. It is what they said that they were going to run on. It's what they put forward. And as progressives, it is important for us to help stiffen the spine of some of the moderates and some of the progressives who are holding the feet to the fire to make sure that this happens. This is what they told us that they would be standing up for. They told us that they would stand up for universal childcare. That's in there. They told us that they would stand up for free community college. That's in there. They told us that there would be HSBCs, free tuition to HSBCs and to minority serving institutions. That's in there. They told us that there'd be expanded child tax credits. That is also in there. There's money in there for expansions on Medicaid. There's money in there for paid family leave so that we can pass Papua New Guinea in our maternity leave plans. So this is the agenda that they have told us. Is it as far as I would want it to be? No. Am I the one who always says that the best plan is the one that we should pass? Absolutely not. But this is what they told us they would pass. This is what we were able to get. This is what we should be able to push for as progressives. The Build Back Better plan, the $3.5 trillion, which is the amount, though it is perfectly paid for, I'd like to point out, so the real dollar amount should be zero, is what progressives are fighting for. We just need to stiffen the resolve to make sure it happens. I get being jaded, but this is the time we need to act to make sure that this plan gets across the finish line.
Couldn't agree more. All right, Lorenzita, I want to bring you back in. I have a few more questions. I know we're getting some in the chat as well. So specifically, how would the Build Back Better plan impact the AAPI community? And what do you see as the most important parts of this piece of legislation?
Of course. So, immigration, climate change, infrastructure, that's all intersectional and all impacts the AAPI community in unique ways. All of these items we're advocating for is ideally in the Build Back Better plan. For immigration, one of the biggest things that we're fighting for is to reunite our families. And what that means in my own personal experience is that it's almost completely luck-based that my mom and dad were able to come to the United States in comparison to the rest of my family. All of my family on my dad's side has applied to come to the US and have been waiting for decades. And in context, that my aunts applied, and my cousins also applied as part of my aunt when they were kids. But the backlog is so bad that those same cousins grew to be adults and have to reapply as adults, which is completely absurd. So one of the items that we're advocating for in the Build Back Better package is the inclusions of provisions to clear family and employment-based green card backlogs. My family and no family should be waiting that long to be reunited. Along with that, as mentioned, the AAPI community is made up of folks of various status, work visas, student visas, folks working on getting their citizenship. As for me, a natural born citizen, that means that we have to make sure that items like the child tax credit in the Build Back Better package is covering all folks of all statuses. And lastly, moving on to climate change and infrastructure, with everything I say, the AAPI community is a lot about family, especially our elders. With the ever-heating climate, there is real concern of our elders passing out of heat exhaustion, and we want to make sure that our elders are safe. Along with that, many of us come from islands surrounded by water, like the Philippines, Sri Lanka, Singapore, Japan, the Maldives. These countries will not exist if sea levels continue to rise. And we want to protect our AAPI families and overseas. So we have to have comprehensive climate justice reforms included in the Build Back Better package.
I couldn't agree more. And Lorenzita, we just got a great question in the chat that I want to actually kind of piggyback on for you from Chispa, Nevada. They ask, how can the Build Back Better, or how can Build Back Better help our communities have access to clean air? So a lot of what you were just talking about, but you know, it is true that here, you know, communities of color disproportionately have asthma and other breathing issues because they are exposed to dirtier air. They're exposed to more toxins in the environment. So how does this address that? And Emily, if you want to hop in here on this one too, I think there's a lot of good stuff in here to try and help address those things.
Of course, 100%. Our AAPI communities, minority communities are definitely disproportionately impacted by poor air quality, as well as having concerns over water, again, with the islands and the sea levels and everything involving that. So we want to make sure that when we build a package like this, it has to address clean air and make sure that the air is breathable for us. I'll let Emily go and continue on with the question.
Yeah, that's a great question. And thank you, Lorenzita. You know, I think another aspect of this is, you know, when we talk about making a transition to a clean energy economy, and when we talk about electric vehicles, we tend to focus on the output of carbon that we're seeing from emissions, right? We're talking about how it directly relates to climate change, but there's a lot of other ground level pollutants that we see coming out of emissions, including SOx, NOx, things like that. And all of that contributes to asthma, pulmonary issues, you know, other health issues. And as Lorenzita said, we know for a fact that lower income and communities of color are the ones who are suffering from poor air the most. So making that transition to a cleaner energy sources will help with those aspects as well. But another piece to mention it specifically as it relates to clean air is that by mitigating the impacts of climate change, we will hopefully see less impacts of wildfires, right? And that you mentioned earlier, Annette, how we've all been suffering from the smoke from California. And so those are other ways that we can contribute to, you know, creating cleaner air for us all to breathe through the Build Back Better.
Absolutely. All right, Emily, we've got a couple questions rolling in for you now. The first one is for Victoria, or from Victoria. She says, why is it important that climate be part of the Build Back Better plan? Because I don't think people naturally understand why it should be. It absolutely should be a part of this bigger agenda. But, you know, all of the things that we got these folks elected on should be part of this agenda, because it's all, as Lorenzita said, it's all interconnected. It's all intersectional. So talk to us about that.
Yeah, this is a great question, Victoria. Thank you so much for this. I think it's really important to realize that this is the first opportunity that we have had to address climate change on a major level in over a decade. Our last opportunity was the Cap and Trade bill back in 2009. And I remember I was an organizer at the time, environmental organizer at the time, watching that crash and burn. And so this is the first opportunity we've had since then to address climate change. And this is the last opportunity that we may have to address it before we start to see some of the worst impacts of climate change take effect. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released a report a few weeks ago that was essentially a code red for humanity, talking about exactly what we will see happen if we don't take, you know, bold climate action. Things like continued drought in the Southwest, more flooding in the Midwest, more extreme weather swings like we saw in Texas with the freezing weather earlier this year, and the heat domes that hit over the Pacific Northwest. And so these are all things that we will continue to see. And again, it's not about preserving, a pristine forest somewhere or one species of owl. It's about making sure that human communities are taken care of. And so that's, why it's so important to make sure that climate is part of this bill.
All right, our next question is, does Build Back Better spell out how workers in fossil fuel or other industries will be trained to work in clean energy fields? So starting to shift that workforce and actually train them for this clean energy future we all hope is coming.
Yeah, and this will be part of the Justice 40 initiative that I mentioned earlier. So some of those funds will go directly to communities who have historically relied on fossil fuels. I'm from Appalachia myself, so I've seen firsthand the impacts of coal mining in that area. And the general plan is to look and see what clean energy technologies will be successful in those areas. Different regions of the country are going to have different availabilities for that. And so we need to figure out what works best in those areas and then find pathways for people to get retrained to work in those industries. But that is definitely part of the Build Back Better plan, and it's a really important piece of it as well.
Absolutely. All right, Lorenzita, I got 2 more questions for you before we do our close. So the first one comes from Maria, and she asks, what does the APIA community look like in Nevada, and how has it grown? And why is that important in the context of this bill and these issues?
So I've said this multiple times, but the API community is the fastest growing community in Nevada, encompassing about 11%. And one of the biggest items that I always mention is that the API community is not a monolith. So that means we have to ensure that we meet the communities where they are. One of the biggest items that our org fights for is ensuring that language access is available for our services. The services that are provided in our partner, the Asian Community Development Council, are available in Chinese, Vietnamese, Tagalog, as just making sure that when it comes back to Build Back Better, that the resources are available to our communities, again, regardless of status, regardless of the language that they speak, and just ensuring that everyone is able to receive what they need.
Absolutely. And then this last question for you from Rudy, he asked, how can we make sure that these issues don't compete against each other? Because I'm already starting to see it, right? It is, oh, well, we can't have this issue, so we should swap it out for this issue. And oftentimes that happens when we're fighting for these really big packages. People get, issues get pitted against each other. So how can we make sure that these issues don't compete against each other, but that we work together with intersectionality, because they are all important to BIPOC communities and frankly, all communities?
Of course, thank you, Rudy, for the question. Of course, all issues are intersectional. I think that that's the thing that we have to bake into all of our conversations. I remember that just a couple of months ago, me and Emily actually were in a climate justice panel specifically about the API community. And Emily, thank you so much for providing your valuable historic insight. But as well as that, one of the items that we talked about was that in the API community, when it comes to climate justice, a lot of members in our community don't know that they're already doing items that are already sustainable. So I know that my parents and a lot of our API elders just collect plastic bags that are from grocery stores, save rice bags just so that they can save on money. But little do they know is that a lot of the time that they are actually also saving the environment by using these items. So making sure that we plug in how these issues impact us in every level of our lives is incredibly important, so that we don't, compete against each other, because we're all fighting for a progressive future.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you all so much for this great conversation on the Build Back Better agenda. Brian, I'm going to have you start, wrap up, make your case. Why should Nevadans support the Build Back Better agenda? And what do Nevadans need to do? Obviously, call Mark Amadei, but call your other representatives too, because they need to hear from you on this, because Mark Amadei is out of touch with regular Nevadans. So, Brian, take it away.
Yep. First thing, call Mark Amadei and call all of your rest of your representatives. And if you happen to know anyone in any other state, call them to call their representatives. But I just want to echo one thing. I was recently talking to the people in the NEA in Washington, D.C., and we were talking about the Build Back Better plan and why it was important not to just carve out the education pieces, because I am the son of an immigrant. I also want to breathe clean air and drink clean water. And if I have a child in the future, I want to have an earth that is sustainable for them. So those are all things that affect me. Those are all things that I need to fight for. And one piece should not come at the expense of others. So I know that at the NEA, they are fighting for every piece of this, even the ones that have been so far ruled ineligible by the parliamentarian. They have not given up the ghost on anything. I don't think we should. Just because one or two senators from Arizona or West Virginia believe that they have a different number in mind doesn't mean that one or two pieces should go. All parts of this are important and they should all be fought for, and that should be the message that goes forward. That is now not the time to cut pieces in order to get a deal. Everything in here is important.
Couldn't agree more. And we've been through our own fights like that here in Nevada, Brian. So we understand what that's like. Lorenzita, final thoughts, why we should pass the Build Back Better agenda, why your community is counting on our representatives in Washington to pass this agenda, and why Mark Amadei should listen to the constituents here in Nevada who are begging him to do this.
I mean, it's everything that I've already said. Making sure that our communities are safe through comprehensive immigration reform, making sure that we pass frankly, climate change infrastructure, climate justice infrastructure that needs to have passed many years ago, and ensuring that, again, as mentioned, clean air, immigration, making sure everyone is safe, all of that needs to be passed and needs to happen now.
Couldn't agree more. And Emily, I'm going to throw an extra little plug in here. Why should the wealthy pay their fair share to get all this stuff done? Because obviously they're not paying enough. If Jeff Bezos can go to space on his questionable looking rocket, normally I call it something else. Why should the wealthy pay more and pay for a package like this so that we can save our Earth?
Wonderful question. That, I think when I get this question, I think back to this idea that I kind of grew up with of environmentalism as personal responsibility, thinking about your personal carbon footprint, thinking about what you personally can do. And that's important. I don't want to discredit that. But I also think that we have to reshift our focus to make sure that the federal government is holding corporate polluters accountable for the destruction that they have caused, because ultimately you and I can, never use a plastic straw again. We can switch to electric vehicles, and our impact is not going to be enough to save the planet. The contributions that they have made to pollution and the destruction of the planet far exceeds anything that you or I, could have done, and they need to pay for that. That is their responsibility. And, I think we really need to focus, our efforts on making sure that that happens.
All right. Well, I want to thank all of our fabulous guests for coming on and talking about the Build Back Better agenda. I know we could talk about this all night because it's a gigantic package, and it is important for the Biden administration to get this done. And it's important that we hold Democrats accountable. It's important that we hold Republicans especially accountable because they're the ones standing in the way of this agenda. And this is an agenda, as you heard earlier, that Frank said, 2/3 of Americans support this agenda and support the wealthy paying their fair share so that we can have important things like immigration reform, like paying our teachers and having good schools and mitigating climate change and the disproportionate impacts on communities of color. But that's not the only stuff in this plan, right? This is childcare. This is, jobs for people. This is so much more. And if you look back in history, like I said, to the New Deal, when you invest in infrastructure and you invest in jobs and you invest in the economy and you make the wealthy pay their fair share, everyone does better. And that is how we lead ourselves out of this crisis. And that is how we have a brighter future going, further down the road once we get out of this pandemic, is we have to invest in these things now. So I want to highly encourage you. Pick up the phone, call Mark Amodei. I don't care if you live in his district, as long as you're here in Nevada, that man wants to run for governor. He's going to try and represent all of us poorly. So I encourage you, call him, let him know how you feel about this, and let him know that he is out of touch with Nevadans and that he needs to stand with all of us on this issue, because it's critical to Nevada's families. And it's critical to the working people who have disproportionately been impacted during this pandemic. And we expect him to stand with us. In addition to that, you need to call the Democrats in our delegation, call our senators, call our representatives, and make sure they understand that you support this too, because it's not enough just to call the Republicans. You got to call the Dems too, and make sure that they're going to vote the right way as well, which I think they are. So my ask of you is tonight, pick up the phone, call Mark Amodei, whether it's tonight or tomorrow morning, and tell him to vote the right way. We will put his number in the chat for you, so this way you all can call his office and let him know you support the Build Back Better agenda, and we expect him to support it too. So with that, I want to say thank you, everyone, for joining us again this evening. We will be back live at 5 next Thursday. It's same time, same place. And we will be talking about more issues that matter to you, the Nevadans that we care so much about. So keep wearing your mask. If you're eligible, go get your booster shot, because now is the time. And make sure you get your flu vaccine too. I just got that the other day, and it was a real happy experience. So thanks, everyone. I appreciate you joining us, and we will talk to you next week. Make sure you call Mark Amodei. Have a great evening, everyone.